either live by the gun or you die by the sword.
Welcome to the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast. I'm Nicho.
And I'm Chris.
And yet again, Chris has been able to sneak another musical in without me really thinking about it too much.
Oh, and what a musical this one is.
Yeah, we are reviewing everyone's favorite bulge with 1986's Labyrinth.
A cult classic, if not the cult classic.
Yeah, kind of.
I mean...
I wouldn't call it the cult classic.
There's a lot of it's the only one to do it sort of things.
Kinda, yeah. For many reasons.
Yes.
But for those unfamiliar, Labyrinth follows a young girl on the edge of adulthood who must travel through a labyrinth to the Goblin City to rescue her baby brother, who she sent away to the city in the first place.
That was an accident.
Was it, though?
And also, after now watching this movie several times back to back, if I was her, I don't know if I would go rescue the baby.
Well, I mean...
We'll talk about it more when we get there, but... But I'm just saying, I watched this movie a lot, in succession, and man, he's a very annoying child.
He cries for like 2 minutes, if that.
Yes, that's enough.
No, Jesus. So, Labyrinth's story is by Dennis Lee and Jim Henson, with screenplay by Monty Python's Terry Jones, another movie that we have Monty Python in.
Yep.
It was directed by Henson, obviously. Stars Jennifer Connelly, David Bowie, Toby Froud, and Sherry Weiser. And our sources for today's episode include commentary by conceptual designer Brian Froud, interviews behind the scenes from the cast and the crew, as well as Jim Henson's Labyrinth, The Ultimate Visual History by Paula M. Block, and Terry J. Ederson, with foreword by Toby Ford and introduction by Brian Henson, Jim Henson's son.
Along with the documentary Inside the Labyrinth, The Making of Labyrinth.
Yeah, I forget that's one of the special features. So
It is, and I also found it, like, you can just watch that one on YouTube if you're interested. There's a lot of very cool behind-the-scenes shots.
Yeah, and so I'm going to put this up front.
Yeah, I know.
I did not see Labyrinth until I was in college.
That's, I think, okay.
So, like, I know where I'm coming from is a little bit of a different background from a lot of people who love this movie, so come at me if you want. My opinions are still going to be my own. That's
fair. I also did not watch this movie until, like, my senior year of high school. I did not grow up watching this movie. It was not a, like, family favorite in our house. However, I think by the end of this, we will see that my views of this movie are very different from yours. Because for me, this movie ticks off a lot of favorites boxes.
Okay. So, originally, Henson and Froud didn't want to make another movie like this. They had just finished Dark Crystal.
Another fantastic cult movie.
Yes, which I actually do enjoy Dark Crystal. I do want to watch the show at some point because Brian Henson worked on it again, too. But, yeah, that's also another one I didn't see till college.
Sure.
But the idea for Labyrinth came after Dark Crystal, when Henson was in a limo with Froud, and they had some discussion that was slightly influenced by wine, and they suggested making another movie.
Yeah.
They went through a bunch of ideas.
Boy, did they ever.
Far East influences, but none of them really stuck because no one really knew the source material.
Yeah.
And I forget who it was. They brought up goblins.
Yeah, they ended up there.
Yeah, that's what pushed it into making Labyrinth. And then on top of that, to get a little bit away from Dark Crystal, Henson wanted to include people and not just make it a puppet movie.
Which some people have mixed feelings about, because it is kind of the running gag of both the Henson and also just the Muppets in general, of pick a movie, replace everyone in the cast with Muppets except one human. This movie's in the same feeling, same vein. Granted, we get 2 full-running humans and then some background humans. I know a lot of people's reasoning for appreciating and liking The Dark Crystal more is, A, The Dark Crystal was a much more serious and dark-themed movie, whereas when they started this one, they started off being like, we want it to be a lighter, more fun movie. And then they regularly kept dipping down into, like, darkness, and multiple people, including David Bowie, had to be like, guys, too far.
Yeah. Well, and on top of that, like, I don't think I've ever fully seen, at least in my memory, I'm sure I have when I was much, much younger, but I don't think I've seen a full Muppet movie.
Okay.
And, like, my only My only tie to Henson was Sesame Street.
Sure.
And that's only because that was what was on AFN at the time when
same.
I was up waiting for the school bus.
Sure. I did not fully grow up with the Muppets like a lot of people did, because we were a public broadcasting household when I was growing up. And so I grew up with Sesame Street, like everyone else did on PBS. But, like, the Muppets had been off the air for quite a while, and we didn't have their DVD. So it wasn't until high school that I really started to get into the Muppets. I had a lot of friends who had Muppet movies of various kinds, like Muppets Treasure Island was a family favorite. Watched that one an absolute butt ton.
I'm aware you've brought it up many, many times.
It's one of my favorite Muppet movies. It's not the best one, but it's one of my favorites. But so those sorts of movies I did grow up watching. Labyrinth I didn't watch because it was a Muppets movie, because I didn't make the connection between Jim Henson and Muppets until much later. I watched it because I was promised a dark, kind of weird 80s trippy movie.
Okay.
Which I kind of got.
Yeah, and I guess in the same way I avoided it because, like Gremlins, I thought it was 100% a kids movie. And they are kids movies, let's not deny that.
Well, especially this one. This was kind of the entire point of this version of this movie, was they made the Dark Crystal, thought it was too mature and too adult for the entire audience, wanted to make something that was a little lighter, a little more fun. However, turns out everyone who worked on this is a dark and sad person. We're still light, we're still fun, but there's a lot of much more mature themes that made its way in than I think they originally wanted.
Yeah, and I think that's just Henson trying to create something that's entertaining, but also, like, deep enough.
Yeah, and this also was the movie at the very cliff edge of Jim Henson's very famous battle with mental health. His son has on many occasions stated that the failing of this movie in the box office was one of the direct results of him, like, spiraling down. He was already in a pretty not narcissistic, but darkish place. Like, he was already in that mindset, and he was really looking for more confirmation that his works were what he imagined, what he saw them. And so he had, I think, a lot of fun making this. It's very clear with the interviews of everyone who had worked with him, and even years later, people's love of this movie is very obvious. But he was definitely putting a lot of pressure and weight behind this movie that I don't know he realized he was putting there.
Well, it wasn't just that. I mean, they mentioned multiple times that he was a workaholic, so...
A terrible workaholic, and is well documented.
Yeah. But, yeah, I mean, it does show the love and the craft that went into this movie, because before they even started all this stuff, Froud imagined and painted a picture of a baby surrounded by goblins, and that became the origin of Labyrinth, per se.
Which is hilarious because he painted it a few months before his son was conceived, and then it ended up that his son happened to look an awful lot like the baby.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people on this movie were kind of like, it is prophesied this movie shall be.
I like my doormat of prophecy.
It is. It's exactly like your doormat of prophecy.
Obviously, they chose the Labyrinth because it has multiple signs and meanings. They also went for a more English garden style with magic and mazes around them, which I do want to point out. Originally, these weren't hedge mazes like we see in the movie, but they were a dense forest that was supposed to go through a journey, and you were supposed to question what was around the corner. They weren't the straight paths that we normally see nowadays.
True.
As well, they were also inspired by medieval works, M.C. Escher, Alice in Wonderland, which we do see quite a bit later on. I mean, it
very much ramps up into it.
Yeah,
it?
It's not original, but it's also kind of original at the same time, the way they twisted it.
I also think that while the Dark Crystal was very much trying to be its own thing and create its own lore, this movie, they very much were deciding they were going to lean into the Britishisms. When they were originally thinking about a movie and, like, what they wanted, they knew that they wanted to have a pop star sort of person as one of the main leads.
Yeah.
And the only people they could think of, one of them was David Bowie. And they're like, what's more British than David Bowie? We shall put him front and center. Very front and center. And they really did
Maybe a little to the left. But
they really did try to lean into a lot of the imagery and ideas and styling that made it a very British show, which ended up helping later on down the line because it had this resurgence when, like, this romanticized version of 80s British culture came back around.
On home video.
Oh my god, yes.
Yeah. But while they were writing the script, Henson and Lee felt like they weren't up to snuff, and so that's when they brought in Terry Jones to rewrite and improve the script, which they said, like, they had the base idea, but he reworked the entire thing, so there's a little bit of Monty Python influence in this too. But also, Jones pulled a lot of the characters from Froud's sketches and just kind of started bringing them into the story, like the Fire Gang. Also, George Lucas aided in the original story to help keep the classic and mythical parts in order that they had set, instead of like trying to, if they were started deviating away from like the mythical path that they were setting up, he's like, hey guys, pull it back just a little bit. I like that idea, but that's not in the themes of these classic mythologies that you're trying to pull from.
And honestly, theme is kind of the key word when critically looking at the Labyrinth. Most of the time we watch it just to enjoy ourselves, have a good time, and see some very, very entertaining puppetry. But as far as like really digging through what the plot is showing and what all the different characters mean and what they are representing, theme. The theme is the overall goal here.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a little heavy-handed at times.
It is, but I kind of like it that way.
Yeah. So before we dive into it, Chris, what are we drinking today?
We have, as one might call it, a huggle of different drinks, because they don't drink anything really in this movie, and none of us wanted to drink the Bog of Eternal Stench. So I have a various collection of different flavors of water. And
I've just got Bitburger because it's the closest thing to UK. Cheers.
Cheers.
So, Labyrinth. We have this magical opening credits full of owls and title card. And the first song, It's Only Forever.
I love this opening so much.
It makes me think of, like, those horse girls in, like, middle school or, like, elementary school.
100%.
Like, they had the very magical-looking folders and shit.
Yeah, my best friend, to a T.
Okay.
I'm surprised we weren't more into this movie, to be honest with you, because granted, there are a variety of different themes throughout the movie as far as visuals and styling, which just that comes with having Jim Henson working in your project. You're going to have a hodgepodge of stuff because that's what Muppets and creatures are. However, the overarching idea of mysticism and abundance of tool is just really great.
Yeah, I mean,
everything's very soft. Everything's got this very filtered look to it. The music is very pop and 80s.
Bad 80s CGI.
Oh my god, it's so good. It's such a vibe.
I think the intro was just to, like, really show off Bowie from the get-go of, like, oh shit, it's Bowie!
It 100% was. They knew what they were doing when they hired him. They also did want to lean in a little bit to this idea of the popularity of music videos. You'll see it a couple times throughout the movie where they knew that Bowie could put on a good musical performance. Why not kind of lean in, get everyone kind of into that idea?
Yeah.
And it is a musical. This isn't a bad way to get you started. Especially because if you didn't know it was a musical going in, surprise! It's a musical.
Yeah.
It's not the most surprise of a musical we've ever had. This does set up the stage if you're paying attention.
I didn't know it was a musical the first time I went into it, and
I'm not surprised.
But that's just me in musicals. Like, I watched a musical earlier this week that I watched Inuo. I didn't know it was going to be a musical because I don't watch trailers, so...
Yeah. The amount of musicals you've been shocked by is really great.
I'll pick one for next year at some point.
I know. It's okay.
But yeah, speaking of David Bowie's music, I mean, they, like you said, they wanted some rock star from the get-go.
Yeah.
But they were very surprised when the fact that when he showed up to, like, show, like, the music that they were thinking of, he had fully produced tracks, not sample tracks.
No, whole tracks.
Whole tracks.
Yeah, to the point where there's 2 full albums for this movie. There is the movie version, and then there is the David Bowie exclusive version, which they are usually released together. I think even from the get-go, they came as like a packaged deal.
Interesting.
And honestly, it makes a lot of sense because he pre-recorded a lot of the music for this.
Yeah.
It was not done after the fact. He came in and was like, I have 3 really great songs, and we are putting them in this movie.
Well, and I mean, that just shows that he was given the full creative freedom that he had, and that's what a lot of people were too. Like, Jones, like, he was given freedom to just completely rewrite the script, basically.
Yeah, and something that we see regularly with the Muppet and the Creatures collection is a lot of the puppeteers were also given a lot of freedom as far as in direction, whether or not they were, you know, what their puppets were doing, what they're looking like, some of them even what they're saying.
Mm-hmm.
It's very much like kind of a free-for-all. And I think it works that way. It makes everything feel much more like a bunch of actors instead of very stiff.
Like Hoggle's character, part of the reason he pauses all the time is so that, or like he just sits there kind of dumbstruck, is so that way the person in the suit can open the mouth and look where they're kind of going.
Yeah, because Hoggle was run by about 5 people.
Yeah.
Because there was a lot of puppetry for the face, and then the body itself was a poor woman stuck inside Hoggle, and then the voice of Hoggle was voiced at the same time as they're acting. So that guy had to be just kind of off to the side, ready to go.
Yeah, Hoggle was specifically Sherry Weiser.
She is the, as they say, man in the suit. But Hoggle was one of the most complex creatures ever created.
Yeah.
Especially for this movie. Later on, we get more complex as technology gets better, but for this time, Hoggle was very impressive.
For those who, I believe we did bring her up on a previous micro review.
Mm-hmm.
She was in Babes in Toyland as Trolog.
Yeah, a memorable movie.
Yeah. Came out the same year as Labyrinth, too.
She was busy.
Yeah.
Honestly, everybody in this movie was busy, which I do think helps with the movie in general, because everyone had a lot of sources that they were pulling from to bring all into this. Because whether or not it's to your taste or not, having a hodgepodge movie like this where a lot of different characters don't go together, but they are in the same world, does mean that having a lot of different influences for what a character or puppet is doing helps a lot. It helps bring everything to life.
And allows people to really own their work instead of being like, this is who you are, this is the steps you're following, go from point A to point B, and we'll do what we want. And
a lot of really memorable scenes were created specifically because of this. Yeah. The hand scene specifically.
Yes. But from this opening, the owl flies into a park with a girl running, setting up basically the entire plot of the movie with the Goblin King, the Labyrinth, the baby snatching, etc., in just a very short time frame, which so I got questions about what exactly she's doing in this. Her name's Sarah, I think.
Yeah.
But is she just cosplaying, or is she so wrapped up in her fantasy that she has to dress for it?
Okay. The only reason I feel like I have an answer, because technically the movie does not really tell us.
No.
But as someone who has watched an egregious amount of 80s movies, it was a popular theme in movies, kind of Disney Channel style, to have your main female character be very into the idea of a very specific play or movie, usually like a Shakespeare-style one, or like a Pride and Prejudice-style movie, or musical, or play, and they are pretending to be the main character, be the main actress, really. So she is pretending to be the main actress in this musical or play that she really likes, which she ends up living out in real life.
Okay.
However, we never actually get told that. I only know this because I watch a ton of other shitty movies, and it is a regularly, recurring theme to have, your 16, 18-year-old main girl be, obsessed with Phantom of the Opera. And she dresses up as Christine in her free time, and she has the, original Roy Weber music, and she is singing her heart out in the shower.
A real Henry Zabrowski.
Yeah, actually.
Yeah. Well, even her dog is named Merlin. I can kind of get it where, kids dress up and pretend, but, it feels weird because we know she's not that young of a kid.
She's meant to be 16 in this movie.
14.
14, yeah.
Yeah, close to 16, but not, fully 16.
Yeah, she's still too young to be a young adult, which, by 80s movie standards, means we have to be very young.
Mm-hmm. But, really, it's just, I think it's such a weird thing, just setting up the movie from that mythical standpoint of just, no, it also, it ties in a little bit like when we talked about My Bloody Valentine, where it's It
does set us up.
Yeah, just setting up the lore from the get-go.
It does. And I also think it does set up the idea of the theme, because the play that she seems to be reenacting, and based off of the cues that she's named her dog Merlin, we can assume that whatever play or movie that she's, trying to recreate and, present herself as the main lead actress in is probably something somewhat, fantasy historical. Think, Shakespeare or the Odyssey, something similar to that.
Yeah, I can see where that's going, because immediately we transition from what feels like an archaic fantasy park, because it doesn't feel like an American park, because it's not. It's in the UK.
It's very British.
But we transition from that to suburban America, which is an interesting way to set up her mind versus reality.
She is 100% one of those kids who, if she had known and had access to British memorabilia in America. She would have had a British flag somewhere in her room.
She would have been a Whovian.
Oh, yeah, so hard.
Yeah, if she was into sci-fi.
Yeah, no, like, she would have been a Beatles fan, but this movie's not about the Beatles, about David Bowie, so...
Yeah.
But yeah, no, she's 100% like into like this like countryside British aesthetic, right? Like you can see it in her room too.
Yeah.
All of her decorations are very like specifically cottagey placed. Everything feels very old world despite her living in a fairly new-ish looking home. Granted, a rich-ass house, but like it's new.
Well, it's also an interesting twist. Like, I mean, don't get me wrong, she's whiny from the get-go.
Oh, she's so whiny.
It's obnoxious. Obnoxiously whiny.
They're all whiny. Everyone in this family in the opening scene, annoying.
Yeah, they do, what I think they do a good job with in this, when she gets home, is setting up that she is definitely a lonely girl.
Yeah.
She's the weird one at school, but also the way she sees the world of, like, it's the very traditional fairy tale of the evil stepmother, and the only scene that we see the parents in at all this entire movie.
No, the parents immediately peace out and never return.
Yeah, which is a great way of setting up the movie that's completely from her viewpoint. Like, there's no other narrative to this movie. This is her reality.
Which honestly does help, too. It helps sympathize with Sarah, because, Sarah's annoying. Sarah's very annoying. But we don't have any other proof that Sarah's stepmother is any different than what Sarah claims, which is bully.
No, we've got proof where, like, she is over dramatic, where she's like, I told you we were going out. We're 2 hours late because you didn't show up. And she's like, you always go out. You're out every night. And it's like, they're probably not out every single weekend, Sarah.
Probably not, but again, we don't have any other, like, true evidence, because after the parents are like, okay, well, you're watching your baby brother, we are leaving, they never come back. We never get their side of the story, and the only other side of the story we get is Toby. And I'm not a fan of Toby.
Why? He's a tiny human.
Yeah. Okay, so Toby's entire purpose in this movie is to do two things. To be annoying, which he does successfully. He is meant to be the aggravation to Sarah at the beginning.
He's the MacGuffin is what he is.
Yes, and then he is meant to be very cute. But he is cute amongst a bunch of goblins later, and it doesn't quite work the same. And we'll get into the whys later, because part of it was Henson realized that his one fatal mistake is he had done the impossible. He had worked with animals, he had worked with puppets, and now he was trying to work with babies. And the babies is what got him.
Yeah, I mean, dealing with tiny humans is interesting to say the least. Boiling raspberries 1 minute and then telling me he pooped himself the next.
Yeah. Don't like it. It's his current phrase.
I know.
But yes, like, Henson went into this very confident with having Toby be in it. Especially this age and what Toby's role is supposed to be. Like, we've seen other portrayals of babies where, like, they're barely in the movie. Toby's in this movie quite a bit for a baby.
The hopes and dreams of what's his name? God, Nick Cage's character in Raising Arizona.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nick Cage. Yeah, so I think most of my complaints with Toby, unfortunately, land on the fact that Henson originally, he thought he'd conquered two of the evil three. The mythical evil three in directing is that you don't deal with those three things. He had done well in the past with animals. He is the master of puppets. He can handle a baby. And I don't think it worked like he thought.
No, not at all. But we do quickly go to Sarah's room where she's even more of a drama queen. Like we said, she's a fantasy weeb. She's got all castles of, like, fantasy books, Wizard of Oz, King Arthur's story, just everything you can think of classical fantasy.
Yes.
She's got in her room.
Old school.
Which, I mean, it is so funny that, like, her life is oh so bad, and, like, she gets pissy because one of her toys, Lancelot, is missing, which it doesn't, I don't know how this happens, because, like, we saw the baby, like, not that long ago, like, 2 minutes, like, not even 2 minutes, a minute ago, didn't have the toy, and now the toy's in the baby's room.
Mom took the toy.
No.
Or Dad took the toy. Like, the toy was on a shelf. Baby cannot get around by himself. He's not walking yet.
He can crawl, at least.
He can. They can't get that. They can't. And from a lot of experience, let me tell you, that toy was gifted by one of the parents, and it is what it was implied to do. Like, it's implied as a way to, like, help solidify your sympathy with Sarah and her distrust of her mom or her stepmom.
She's at that age where she doesn't want anyone in her personal space.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's just a dumb moment.
Well, and I don't think it was done with quite enough care and attention.
Mm-hmm.
We very quickly get to see where the bear was placed. It's got like a little shrine with all these other bears. It's not just like on the floor or in a pile of toys. But it's very quick. It's like a very like almost background where like we pan almost immediately to her to see how upset she is.
Mm-hmm.
We don't get to see, Toby with Lancelot. He's just on the ground.
Yeah.
So like I do see why you wouldn't get to the conclusion. The only reason I'm here and like I got to it is because I had to watch it several times.
Yeah, just something stupid.
Yeah.
That I'm bitching about, but we also get our little first bit of like the little goblins where
I love them.
Yeah, she's starting to read her story to the baby of like, oh, the Goblin King will get you, but I gotta say the right words. And honestly, I know you like the goblins. I know you're a fan of Muppety stuff.
I am a fan of Muppety things. And I think the reason I like these Muppety things is these are very classical. And granted, we keep saying Muppets. I am fully aware that these are not Muppets. All of these are creatures.
Mm-hmm.
Muppets are a very specific thing from the Jim Henson world. But I like these a lot because they have a lot of the similar movements and vibes as classical or more traditional family-friendly Jim Henson productions.
Mm-hmm.
From here, like after this scene, most of our creatures act more like creatures as opposed to Muppets.
Mm.
So this one, they're much more goofy. They're popping out of silly places.
Well, they haven't popped out yet. They're just hiding behind... They're hiding somewhere, like in a cupboard or something, waiting for the magic word. It makes me think of, like, what gremlins actually would be, just hiding in the background in the darkness, waiting for mischief.
They feel silly. They feel very much like very English version of goblins and trolls, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can say they're there, but they're only out the corner of your eye.
Yeah, they remind me a little bit of the orcs from the animated Lord of the Rings, because
yes. It's the ears, for me.
That and their stupid, like, little...
They have puggy faces.
Yes, that's what
they have little piggy faces, and I love them very much.
Yeah, God, what's the one Lord of the Lash song?
Oh, Goblin Town? Down, down, down.
No. It's the Lord of the Rings one where it's like I can't remember. It's been in my head lately. It's
okay.
The Master of the Lash or something.
Oh, I'm not sure on that one.
Yeah, but...
my favorite one by far is Goblin Town from The Hobbit.
I don't remember that one.
It's so stupid, and I love it very much.
We'll have to do the animated ones at some point.
We will. I own them and I watch them regularly.
I know you do. But we have a quick building of the lore in her fantasy world in the book. It's a good reiteration of the first part, but it's a little bit more in depth of like explaining of like how you have to go through the labyrinth to the Goblin City and whatnot. And
I do like that we do get a little bit of a precursor of what this story and plot is meant to be, because from the beginning, the writers and the directors wanted this to have that big epic feel, so it means we need to go places and do things.
Mm-hmm.
But it feels very much all over the place. I do like that we have this little intro bit to kind of like get you set up, get you ready to go through the labyrinth to the Goblin City and do all this stuff. Because later on, I'm not gonna lie, I keep forgetting that we had this scene.
Yeah. I mean, it is very easily forgettable too, because I mean it's just her building up saying that her not saying the words right, but then finally says it's like because you have to invite the goblins in, which it's our first little bit of humor. There's fuckery afoot.
I like that they're popping out from underneath the bed and behind pillows and stuff, waiting for her to say it correctly. It's very cute.
Oh yeah, but here's some things about this too. I think this would have worked so well as an actual like horror film too. Which
I love that you say that, because this part you can see where the writing originally did take a dark turn. And Bowie himself had to come in at the beginning and say, if you don't lighten it up, I'm withdrawing my statement of working with you guys.
I don't blame him.
And I don't either, because he was promised a lighthearted, like, classical film. He had seen and loved the work of these guys before and was very excited to work with them. And they had given him a lot of free reign. And so when they were giving him free reign to create the backstory of the Goblin King from the beginning, this scene was a little darker.
Yeah.
And he stepped in and he was like, look, here's the backstory I've come up with this character, which we'll talk about in a second.
Okay.
This doesn't fit with that, and if you can't get this a little bit lighter, I'm gonna have to step down. And they did solve it.
Yeah, I can see why, like...
I do too, because they had done a very dark film already, and that was their goal.
It's very Critters-esque.
Yeah.
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 But the Goblin King is here. I do love, like, the childish moment of, oh shit, I fucked up, mom and dad are gonna ground me, let me backtrack a little bit.
100%.
And, like, his tempting with the quote-unquote treasure of a magic orb that doesn't go to whiny girls, it only goes to special girls.
Yes, also, I'm so glad that the hand juggling happens immediately, because I must share the fun fact. So
the obligatory fact of Labyrinth.
Much like in Lord of the Rings, everyone must tell you that he broke his toe during that one scene. In Labyrinth, you must inform everyone that David Bowie cannot actually hand juggle. Mm-hmm. At least not good enough for this movie. Instead, they hired a man whose entire job is some slight street magic and hand juggling.
Just makes me think of the fushigi balls, like when we were kids.
Yes, and I told this to my husband on the way home yesterday, because we had, at Girls' Night, watched this movie again, because they hadn't seen it. And so we had been awed by this hand juggling, because if you watch it in the movie, it does look like David Bowie's character is the one hand juggling. But he's not. And because this is a Jim Henson company, and he likes to do everything he can with practical effects, that means that it's not green screened either. It means there is a man crouched down behind David Bowie with his arm shoved through his armpit, hand juggling, blind.
Yeah.
Or, in some cases, laying on the ground with his arm in the air, trying not to drop very heavy solid crystals onto his face.
Yeah, it's fantasy.
It's incredibly challenging. And, like, you don't realize how hard it is until you see some of the behind-the-scenes clips, because he does make it look very effortless. And it looks exactly like you would not know this. Yeah.
And, well, they did a good job with, like, the camera work, so, like, you don't actually see the arm coming out.
No,
you just see the hand from below.
And it doesn't even feel like they're cutting it off to, like, distract you. It feels very intentional, like, everything feels so smooth, everything looks really great. It is one of my favorite fun facts of this movie. And I brought this up to my husband, and he goes, "What are you talking about?" I was like, "Fushigi, Brian. You were the target audience of Fushigi." And he's like, "I never had a Fushigi." So that's going to be his Christmas present. He missed out.
I never had a Fushi.
You weren't the target audience. My husband was into origami and hacky sack juggling as a child. You can't look at me and tell me he isn't the exact person they were trying to sell Fushigi to.
A niche little thing that they're trying to, like, get you hooked on for, like, a couple weeks, and then you realize it's hard and you stop doing it.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. He taught himself to solve a Rubik's Cube because he thought it would be cool. He would learn to hand juggle because he thought it would be cool.
Brian is a fascinating human.
He really is. And the fact that Fushigi commercials did not catch him is really a miracle.
Yeah.
I think he must just never have noticed it.
I don't know.
I don't know. But boy, this is before Fushigi. So, like, good on this man for bringing to light, honestly, something that was really only seen in magic shows. Mm-hmm. So now we have this Fushigi nonsense. And, like, honestly, if you had TV in the late 90s to early 2000s, honestly, this is kind of all you can see when you watch this, is listening to Fushigi commercial. However, if you had not grown up during when we did, this would have looked like a magic act.
Yeah, and I mean, the only reason I knew, so my time frame for knowing Fushigi is like 3 years, so.
That's honestly, I think, the great length that it went to, but it was just constantly on TV, much like ShamWow or Slapshot.
Yep.
But, the only reason I am able to make this jump to, like, oh, this is meant to be a magician, like a classical stage magician, is because one of my hobbies as a child was to watch old 80s magicians from, like, the Vegas Strip. And this was a thing that, like, street magicians would, like, be showing off as, like, a cool trick. And so, like, I get where they were trying to go. They were trying to make Jareth a more, like, magic, like, wizardy sort of character.
Yeah.
They're trying to show that, oh, he has magic, but he doesn't have a wand, he just has a crystal. And unfortunately, they got Fushigi'd.
It makes me think also a little bit of, like, the sphere in Phantasm.
Yes.
The one in all sphere that does everything you need.
Yep.
Yeah, but also, like, this transition between her going from a child to, like, trying to be responsible is such a hard turn that, like,
it's so out of left field.
You get a bit of whiplash.
Definitely. I see kind of the idea of, like, well, the character and actress that she was pretending to be earlier would have been older. Mm-hmm. And so that's what she's trying to be, is she's trying to give herself the opportunity to live out that fantasy.
She's trying to be an adult.
Yeah. But I don't think it quite reads through all the way. It just kind of makes Sarah feel like an awkward character, which, I mean, she is a teen. They are awkward, so I don't think it's wrong.
Well, and for a child actor, she actually does a really good job. They said that she took direction very well, and they got exactly what they wanted when they said, hey, could you do it this way instead? Yeah, and she did it. But I do want to now talk about the large presence that is Bowie in this movie.
Yes. He is all-powerful and all-consuming.
He is, in many ways, supposed to reflect the adolescent's thought and is a hodgepodge of classic costuming mixed with ideas of, like, knights and kabuki performers, which maybe explains the cod piece a little bit. You're at that age where it's like, hey, what you got going down there?
True, and we can see later on with the costuming choices in, like, the ball scene, and also just from the decorations in her room, that most of the characters who she would be interested in and, like, fantasizing about would be, like, romanticized, you know, medieval or Victorian at earliest, right? So, it makes some sense. The thing that kind of, I think, throws everyone for left field, and, like, you don't have time to consider, is it's David Bowie. And he was allowed a lot of freedom with not just his, like, character, but also a lot of the character design. And so he kept a lot of his very classical David Bowie looks, which meant big 80s rock hair, the, like, at the time, famous eyebrow and eye makeup. That was part of his look at the moment. Okay.
See, I'm not super familiar with David Bowie. The only knowledge I have of David Bowie is from, like, the couple things I've seen in this, and then No Dogs in Space covering of, like, him and, like, his whole magical history and feud with, actually it might have been last podcast on the left, but his feud with Jimmy Page and stuff. Because we got to remember, David Bowie was also into esoteric knowledge and shit, too.
Yes,
so.
yeah. No, so, like, a lot of the, like, from the neck up is very much, like, he chose that. That was all him. And then the costume, like, they had costume design. There was definitely costume leads. He did not pick all of this himself. But there was definitely parts that he influenced more so. Like, instead of having a more tunic look, it's, you know, shirt and tights. Which leans more into what his style of rock looked like at the time.
Glamish.
He was very into glam, and his glam did change over the years.
Mm-hmm. With his different characters, Ziggy Stardust and whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, like, this look would have been unmistakably just, like, David Bowie, the rock star's face on a fantasy man's body, which, if that doesn't scream, like, high school, like, adolescent girl dream, I don't know what does.
Was this the Bell Peppers and Milk phase of Bowie, or?
I honestly don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I don't know if he was still doing heavily drugs at that point, or.
I don't think so, but it's Bowie, and it's the 80s.
Yeah.
Who's to say?
I just don't know enough history of it, so. But even, like, his tempting of Sarah is, like, kind of piss poor attempts. It's just like,
it is.
Ooh, magic ball. Well, if you're not gonna take it, then come to the magical land that we're just gonna magically be transported to. You have 13 hours because 13's an unlucky number to get the baby.
Tee-hee-hee. Yeah. Part of, like, the logic behind the character Jareth only makes sense if you listen to a handful of interviews with David Bowie. Mm-hmm. He was given pretty much free reign to think up the backstory to this character, and in his mind, the Goblin King Jareth did not want to be Goblin King. He had, like, recently come into power sort of thing, and, like, wasn't really stoked to be the Goblin King.
I don't want to be leading the Goblin King. I just want to dance, Daddy.
Yes. Okay, I know you're, like, doing that as a bit, but that was his idea.
That's so great.
No, replace the word dance with rock star. And that was legitimately David Bowie's interview.
Okay.
That's like, he very much was trying to, like, look at this from Sarah's point of view, but also, like, he was told, like, this is going to be a very, like, traditional English-inspired fantasy, and he was told you are goblin and king, and he went with the whole, like, oh, begrudgingly the king.
But at the same time, as we see him through the movie, he kind of enjoys it a little bit.
He likes fucking with people.
Yeah.
And Sarah's prime target. She makes it easy.
Yeah, it gets a bit creepy. Like,
yes, and that was something that a lot of people nowadays have pointed out more and more with this movie, and also with David Bowie in general.
Yeah, well,
but
it's also a good theme for this movie, too, because she's a child, but she's getting attracted to men that are
Yes.
She's getting attracted to men,
yes.
which...
Yeah, so, like, she is becoming an adult. Like, this is part of it. And it's part of the reason why this movie has withstood the criticisms that people have brought up, either with, as, you know, time has passed after David Bowie's death, the more we've learned, and the more we haven't learned about him. So... Well, it's held up is the best part. Thankful.
And this leads into one of the thoughts I have about this movie is I had a question of how much of it was real. Was it all in her head? Like, was the baby ever really in danger?
Sure.
Because it proposes itself like it is potentially real, but like and this is why I think the Muppets actually end up working well is because if it's in her head, she's still a child.
Yes. And
the most realistic monster in this movie is the Goblin King, which would be technically a real monster in our world if he was a person.
Sure. No, I think it's a very valid question, and I think it's on purpose, like, left open-ended. It is a very common trope in, like, classic literature from especially British style. Think Peter Pan. Granted, I know if you're going to be a big Peter Pan person, like, I know nowadays, like, we've gone back, we know, but it's that concept, that idea of, like, well, is it really, like, happening, or is it just a moral? Is it just a lesson story? And I don't think it matters, and I think that's why it works.
Yeah, it's very much, was any of it real?
Sure, and I mean, who cares? The stakes are low.
I care.
Okay.
The stakes are actually kind of high, because if she stays there, she's stuck in that real world, the baby's turns into a goblin.
That's true, but I was also...
if she stays and she lasts, she's going to be a child bride for the Goblin King.
I mean, she would make it sound like this is not the worst option she's had all week.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, if the Goblin King had come to her, which, by the way, Jareth is, like, the least intimidating name for, like...
Oh.
I am Jareth, Goblin King.
I know you haven't seen it yet, but I'm going to force you to because it's an abomination, but I love it. Very much in line with the idea of hoodwinks. Keith. Ooh, here comes Keith. Change your name, Keith. It's not scary.
It's been so long since I've seen Hoodwinks.
I love that movie. It's garbage, and I am fully aware of it, but it's got some great one-liners.
Yeah, I remember it being pretty entertaining.
Jareth is also a terrible, like, woo, watch out for Jareth. But at the same time, it's very British.
Yeah.
It's an old-sounding name, even if it doesn't, like, have ties, right?
Even the baby's name of Toby.
I hate Toby, but it's an 80s name. I'll let Toby slide. And, like, Jareth is a name that, like, it could be some king's name, but it's thankfully not, like, King James. Like, who would probably, like, remind her too much of her own father or something like that. Like, this is a fantasy name.
And also, in the same vein of, I just went to Dad's Daddy, it sounds like he gave himself that name, where it's like, I am James the Third, but I prefer to be called Jareth.
Jareth is my stage name. Yeah, I would totally believe that.
Yeah. Well, and it's also a cool transition, too, that I think, because...
we do go from a very realistic set to a very fantasy set.
Yes and no. So, when they're crossing the bridge... when she crosses the bridge in the real world, there's all these statues around her that we see reuse as she's crossing over into this world.
That's true.
They're very obelisk-like. But now we finally get to meet the first denizen of the labyrinth, who's pissing into the pond and spraying fairies.
I love him dearly.
He's fun.
He's a treat because he's an ass, but he's a lovable ass. And I think they do a great job with Hoggle!
Yes.
One of the most complex creatures created at the time ever, and for this movie, he's by far the most complex thing that is regularly on screen.
Oh, yeah. And, I mean, he is an interesting character in the fact that how he changes in his role. He doesn't really change or grow as a character.
No.
He just
becomes slightly more confident in himself.
And he realizes what he needs to do. But also in this bit, too, I like that it's really forcing Sarah to start questioning things, because it feels like everything, even though she's got an evil stepmother, it feels like Sarah's been giving everything she needs. Like, her entire room is decked out in her fantasy weeb shit.
Oh, yeah, no. Sarah has never had to, like, think for herself.
Yeah. But then, like, the fairy bites her, and it's like, yeah, that's, if you go back to mythology, that's what fairies were like.
Yeah. I also think that, like, the beginning of this movie does a great job of also trying to set up what the actual lesson is. Because it is easy to assume that the like moral of Labyrinth is a growing up story, but it's really not. It's really more of learning to think for yourself and be independent.
It's a movie about self-discovery too, because a lot of it is like when she's like, well, where's the door to the labyrinth? And he's not answering.
It's like literally right there.
Well, there's a line that he says, not if you ask the right question. Or she's like, it's not fair. And he's like, not if you ask the right questions.
Yes.
And that's the whole point of the movie, is like learning to think rationally and think abstractly at the same time.
Yes.
Which, good writing on this movie.
Oh, very good.
But we do get into the labyrinth, which is sparkly trees and maze. Like, it feels very like arts and crafts. I made this maze.
It does look very pretty.
This part was supposed to be very Venice-like, and I can see a little bit of it. But it starts getting weirder and weirder as we get further into the maze. We got moss that's got eyes on it, and the worm. I
love the moss that has eyes on it. One of the Muppeteers had brought this idea forward of like, well, what if the like maze itself watches you? And they said, yeah, run with it, but with more eyes. So this poor guy had to mount like 5 different motors to make all these different eyes blink and move independently. And it just goes to show that like they really had a lot of free reign as far as what to make and do for this movie.
Even the little worm that we see for like a minute of this movie.
I love him.
He's fine.
Hello.
Did you say hello?
No.
I said hello, but close enough.
I like how just blunt he is.
Everyone's so blunt in this movie.
They really are, but it kind of works for the best because Sarah needs someone to tell her how it is. She, like, walks past the opening multiple times. She walks past the door several times and I know the idea is like, oh, she's supposed to be learning how to ask the right questions and see things from a different perspective. Yeah.
Well, and I do think that shift in perspective is really cool, where it's just everything is practical effects. Even the Bowie flip we see at the end.
Very true. I also think you can very much see the Alice in Wonderland in this.
Oh, yeah. Like, it starts getting a little bit surreal, but never, like, fully there.
Yes.
But also, because we see stuff outside of what she sees, it's the very Hitchcock bomb under the table.
Of course.
We learned that we shouldn't be trusting everything we hear, because she's about to go to the Goblin City.
She could have just made it there.
Yeah.
Yeah, this movie would have been a lot shorter.
But the worm distracts her.
Well, he thinks he's helping.
No, he doesn't. He knows he's helping the Goblin King.
That's true.
Because that's the thing. Everyone in this world, except for Ludo.
That's true. God bless Ludo.
Yeah, is helping the Goblin King for some reason.
Well, he is their king.
But one thing I do also want to point out is the matte paintings and the perspectives in this movie.
Oh, yeah.
Are so well done.
They're so nice.
It's great to see the step from Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, where like, you can see where the stage ends.
Yeah.
This one,
flat. This one goes on.
Yeah, you can kind of see it at parts, but for the most part, it's really well done.
It feels very much like she has stepped into a fantasy painting, and that does continue on this idea of like what her fantasy world would look like.
Oh yeah, I mean, we actually get to see like how it also does a good job of showing how daunting everything looks ahead of her. Where like the labyrinth is the start.
Yeah.
Of her problems.
And it's gigantic.
Yeah.
It's huge.
How is she ever going to do it? But we don't care about that right now, because now it's time for the Power of the Babe song, which
it takes you really out of left field, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Surprise, it's very much a musical.
It's fine. I mean, I get it's to set up the mischief of the goblins, and I mean, it's really the first scene that we fully see them, because we've only seen bits and pieces of them the last time. But I don't get why we have to have these musical bits. Like, it's not like it's a kid. It's not fully a kid's movie where it's supposed to distract them like Aladdin.
The 80s loved musicals.
I don't.
Part of the reason this song is here is because Lucas and Henson both thought that this moment needed a musical piece to help the Goblin King and the baby bond. We wanted to have this connection between those two characters so that there was more desire for the Goblin King to keep Toby there. They wanted to solidify what that looked like. They wanted to show off that the Goblin King is like a mischievous sort of character. Maybe even like a Puck sort of character from Midsummer's Night Dream.
Is Puck the fawn?
He's like the mischievous fawn, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know of it a little bit, but...
So, that's what they were trying to do with the song. David Bowie did add a lot of his own flair to it, and he admits that this was by far the most difficult piece that he had to do, not only because there was a lot of puppets on a Swiss cheese stage, because there's like 50 people crawling around, sticking their hands through different holes throughout the set. They also decided kind of last minute that a lot of the creatures that were being operated fully by little people in suits, they would start having a jumping scene. That was a bit last minute. So that changed also where and like how he could act and sing and dance.
So it's basically just to show that Toby is not in immediate danger.
No, it's supposed to show that like Jareth has like become attached to Toby, and he would like him to stay, but like as a baby. So he has this confliction a little bit. I don't think it shows that well. This is all based off of interviews and like discussions with what the original character and song was meant to look like. The other thing that made this scene challenging was Toby was supposed to cry a lot more in this. However, the baby that was Toby for this was an incredibly happy-go-lucky baby who spent almost the entire time just smiling and wouldn't even make gooing sounds. Like, they really wanted it, like, eventually, like, halfway through the song, they thought, oh, well, by now, once we get into the magic dance main part of the song, the baby will perk up and be happy that it's now here having a good time with Jareth. However, the baby just would sit and smile and giggle. Like, it wouldn't, like, make a big giggle. So all of the baby giggling noises is just David Bowie.
Beautiful.
Because they couldn't get this baby to be loud enough.
Okay. So in this song, is Sarah supposed to be Babe?
No. Baby is baby.
But it's saying Babe, try as hard as Babe could try.
Yeah.
I think the song's more about Sarah, because it's not like it does this bit and then goes back to her. It continues playing as we see her trying to make her way through the labyrinth still.
Definitely. I think, unfortunately, this is the prime example of the weakest song in the entire movie, because according to Henson, who was supposed to be directing this bit, the song is supposed to be about Toby and Jareth. And that was also David Bowie's understanding of the song, was it was meant to be about these two characters, and like she's just here for reasons.
Okay.
I don't think it works. I don't think lyrically it works. I do like the song a lot. It's very catchy. It's very cute.
I think
it's just...
I think it works from the perspective that Sarah is like his object of affection, and
sure,
how hard she's trying to make it through the labyrinth. But
I 100% agree. I just think that a lot of the intention got sidetracked to a different thing, and we should have just pivoted to like this being about Sarah.
Yeah, because I mean, it's mixed in with the playfulness of the labyrinth, like people, like creatures twisting the stones that she's...
Yeah.
The only stone she's writing directions on happens to be the one that they can rotate.
I do like that. That cracks me up a lot. And I also love that Sarah is such a ditz that instead of writing like on the wall or like having different marks, she only marks on like a specific stone on the floor. She just bend down every time.
I mean, that's how I do my map in Etrian Odyssey Nexus right now.
I mean, it just cracks me up that like she is also so oblivious that she does not ever look back to realize that like, because it's not like, oh, she goes around the corner and it happens. She marks it, takes a step, and the stone flips over.
Yeah.
And she doesn't even go, what was that noise? And turn around. Like, she just does not notice.
She's focused.
She's very focused, apparently.
Yeah, but it's not long before she still ends up in a direction with the double-headed guards, which...
I love these guards.
More of It Ain't Fair, which, honestly, these guards are quite creative. I guess they were originally based on a suit of cards. Which also the reason they're close to the wall is to hide the puppeteers.
Yeah, there was a lot of very ingenious ways of making this set, and honestly a lot of the puppeteers regularly mentioned throughout the interviews that they were very worried the sets wouldn't stand for very long because of how many holes were cut in places for them to hide. Oh yeah, I mean,
that is the one thing I will say is, as much as I don't really care 100% for the designs,
sure,
and their puppetiness or the muppetiness,
most of these are very muppety. I will give you that.
I still recognize the skill and the talent it takes to bring all this together. I mean, it is impressive to me still.
Very true. And we watched this on your very fancy Blu-ray 4K edition version of this.
25th anniversary or something.
Yeah, which
30th.
Is a very nice version, and I do recommend it for all of the special features, and the book that it comes with was very nice. However, if you, like me, originally watched this on a much smaller and blurrier screen, you are going to be both happy that you get to see so much more of the puppets, like they are in much better detail, they are much crisper, the color has gotten better. You do see a lot more of the fine lines and wrinkles on David Bowie, and it does make the age gap really uncomfortable.
Like playing Guess the Age Gap with the Bond movies.
Yeah, like, especially Bond is a great one. If you watch the original Bonds on their VHS copy, you're like, oh, it's not that bad. And then you watch the new versions on the, like, on your big TV with, like, the fancy Blu-ray edition, and you're like, oh, nope, it's real bad.
Yeah, I can see that. But I don't think any of the guards in this know the right way. I think, like, only maybe the worm knows the way, but, like, no one else is, like, they're like, if he's telling the truth, maybe he's right, maybe he's wrong.
Okay, so this is based off of an old British legend.
Yeah, I know.
So, like, and she does technically ask the correct question, because she's a British legend nerd, and so she's already run into this puzzle before, so she already knows the answer.
But she could never figure it out before, which shows her growing.
Shows her growing, but it also shows that she's already run into this puzzle somewhere. Like, this has already been something that she has learned. She's not learning something new. The thing she wasn't prepared for was the fact that neither of these characters actually knows what they're doing.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's exactly it. She's like, I figured it out. No, you didn't. They didn't know what the hell they were talking about.
You should have asked, do either of you know how to get there? And the answer would have been no, and yes. Yeah,
no, exactly. But we do get the cool bits with the helping hands, which...
I do like the helping hands.
I like that they they did puppets, but they went and like, well, what else can we do that's not fully puppets? Let's do hand faces.
And part of that came from Terry Jones having been inspired by, like, children drawing, like, the eyes and then lipstick on their hands to make it talk. And he brought this idea to Henson, and Henson loved the idea, but was like, well, you know, here's why on a technical scale from a videoing and like with the lights and stuff why it wouldn't work, and it evolved from one hand or two hands being the puppet to having this 6, 8, 10 hand face that morphs and changes, which then changed how the voice sounded, and then changed how the room looked, and then changed how Sarah interacted with the room, and it created this whole scene from an idea that he had on the way to show.
Yeah, I can see that. And I mean, honestly, this set, if you see it out like pulled back in the whole thing, it's like a 40-50 foot cylinder.
It's incredibly impressive.
Cylinder.
And this is the set too, because this was fairly early on in the like recording sessions. When they had originally proposed all this, especially to Bowie and to Connolly, when they had originally proposed it to them, Henson and Lucas had both come forward and been like, we don't think this is going to be a very dangerous like production. Like, you'll just need to be careful on the stage with the like puppeteers around you, but other than that, it should be a fairly safe. Like, there's no flying, there's no like rope tricks or anything. And then as the production kept going, this was the scene where Henson had to like take both of them aside and be like, by the way, no, this is actually becoming very dangerous.
Yeah, it was that one and also the sewer grinder.
The sewer grinder scene, yes. Both of those, he had to like come to terms and be like, I have actually created a monster.
Yeah.
But it's really cool.
Yeah, no, exactly. But when she gets sent down, even though she's like, well, since I'm facing this way, I guess down. She chose down.
And I love how immediately she's like, wait, was that wrong? And it's like, it doesn't matter.
Too late, you already chose, which...
Yeah.
I mean, it obviously is wrong because it puts her in an oubliette, which an oubliette is a secret dungeon with access only through a trapdoor in its ceiling. It's a very sparkly oubliette.
It is a very, very sparkly oubliette.
Yeah. We got Horgel's there.
I like how he's just everywhere.
He's the henchman of choice for Jareth.
I guess so, but I also feel like he's just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
No. He's in the right place at the right time because remember, he's originally going to be trying to send her back to the beginning to break her spirit.
That's
but
true.
Betrays her for basically less than breadcrumbs plastic.
Well, it's very fancy plastic.
Sure. But I do think the door change here is pretty cool too, where he opens up the secret passage.
I love the very brief creativity in this scene.
Mm-hmm. But that's the thing, is so much of the creativity in this movie is so brief that you don't get a moment to like really sit and think about it. Because like some of this stuff obviously took hours upon hours to make. Like once they're out, the talking heads then showing the treacherous nature of the land of Horgel's like, don't listen to them, they're just here to discourage you.
True. That's true.
Yeah. I mean, we never see them again.
There's a lot of scenes that are about to happen that are very cool, but again, they only, like, you see them for 5 minutes, 10 minutes at best.
Yeah, it kind of feels like a little bit of, this is where it feels more kiddie, in the fact that it's just constant distractions left and right.
Yes.
Because we get the orb that pops out of the hallway, revealing the Goblin King, which I think is really cool.
I do too. But it does feel very, like, child fantasy.
Also reminds me a little bit of Phantasm, just a little bit.
Yeah, I can see it.
But this is where we start getting, like, kind of the quote-unquote warnings of the potential dangers of the pit of eternal stench for betrayal, and...
I do like how that's the, like, thing of doom. It feels very Princess Bride in its naming, which that was meant to be goofy. And I feel like this is also meant to be a little goofy as far as, like, that's the worst she could think of.
Yeah, if it's all in her head.
If it's all in her head.
Yeah.
If not, whoever wrote this play, that's the worst they could do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But we are seeing a change in Sarah, too, at this point, too.
True.
She's not just trying to play an adult, but she's reading into the fantasy, and so she's trying to be... She thinks she knows the way because she got one answer. Mm-hmm. She thinks she got one answer right.
That's true.
I mean, the Goblin King responds in turn. He's like, "Oh, if it's that easy, well, half the time." Again, and then she immediately reverts back to, "But that's not fair." Yeah.
Boy, if you are like don't want to hear the phrase "that's not fair" like a lot, this movie is not for you. No. It's like all she says.
No. But I do want to say that the transition here from the orb to the grinder.
Yeah,
is so cool.
It's very cool. And the idea of the grinder is also cool. It's a very darker version of, like, the street cleaning aspect of this labyrinth as opposed to, like, the very fairy tale, like, countryside that we had been seeing.
Cleaning, but also a trap at the same time.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Just run you over.
Well, and imagine, like, what this is, too, is... Because I know it's supposed to feel like the orb transforms into it, but that thing's just chilling in the darkness.
Oh, just been there.
That's just Jareth throwing an orb at it to be like, "Hey guys, start it up."
Yeah, no, for sure.
But we also get some interesting development after this too, where Sarah gets quite good at calling Hoggle by his real name.
Which is good, because she has called him everything but Hoggle at this point.
And it's also showing that Jareth is not a good guy.
He is more bad guy than we gave him credit for.
Yeah, he never calls Hoggle by his real name.
No, and he does it on purpose, whereas Sarah just isn't paying attention.
Yeah, very Ron Swanson of, "Don't get too close, I'll call you by your wrong name."
Yeah. Oh, very much.
Yeah, or just doesn't give a shit.
Both, I think.
Yeah, we do get, like, a little bit of the setup of Hoggle's eventual betrayal, which is nice. There is, like, pre-warnings throughout this movie. It's just they are immediately distracted by a lot of very fancy things. Yeah. I mean, the maze has changed now, too, which shows advancement. We're got nutcrackers, and we're in a hedge maze now. But Sarah's also even further developing as an adult, or young adult. Mm-hmm. When she takes the jewelry back because, he was going to betray her, he says, "That ain't fair," and she's like,
"You're right, it's not."
Yeah, realizing the world ain't fair, and that's the way it is.
It does feel a little bit pull you up by the bootstraps 80s mindset, but I do feel like it's fitting for this film.
No, it is. It's just her realizing, things aren't going to go your way every single time.
Yeah.
Now you meet another character who's barely in it, the Banjo-Kazooie Wiseman, which...
Yeah, for funsies, really.
It's all a scam, contradictory advice, very tarot card or mythic reading, if you've ever been to one of those, where it's like, gives you vague enough advice to like, "Oh, I have some guidance from some cards."
Sure.
But this comes from the Victorian era, where they would actually hire hermits in these gardens to entertain guests who stumble upon them.
Yep, that was your job, was to hermit. Yeah. And honestly, I feel like it'd be a great job.
I would love to have that job. Are you kidding me? I would love to be some dude's like garden hermit.
I would be an excellent hermit.
You already are basically a hermit.
That is true. I'm so close, I just need someone to pay me to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this is the part where the labyrinth is very much Alice in Wonderland, like, with also the guards, too, with their funny little claw grabbers.
Yeah.
Living claw grabbers.
Yeah. Some of these are actual people hands, some of them are puppet hands. They're all run by, like, 3 people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's impressive that it still takes that much to do all that.
Yeah.
But this is where we meet Ludo, the gentle giant, with his psychic rocks, which... I know you brought it up earlier, like, I was under the assumption that everything in this was some type of goblin.
Yeah, no, he's just hanging out, and honestly, he feels a little bit... So they openly admit that, like, Wizard of Oz and Alice in Wonderland, those are all, like, those classical works of literature are all inspirations for this movie. However, there was a handful of people who had recently seen Yoda in Star Wars and were incredibly impressed by the puppeteering of Yoda and R2-D2. And there were some people who had even worked on those films who had come over and had worked on those productions originally. And so they brought in a lot of influence, and I think you can see it really clearly with Ludo and his floating wizard rocks.
Yeah,
it's giving very strong Star Wars vibes.
The Force is strong with, and he's also floating upside down, like Luke is at one point trying to balance the rocks.
Yeah, and he has Wookiee fur.
Yeah, I can see it.
And once you hear that interview, it is very hard to unsee Ludo as a Star Wars inspired creature. Otherwise, I would probably not have gotten to that. But once they told me, I can't unsee it.
Yeah, I can. And I mean, you can kind of see it in some of the other stuff, like with the giant mech we see a little bit later.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, even Hoggle just a little bit.
Yeah, part of the Hoggle was they were very impressed with Yoda's eye and mouth movements, and so they wanted to one-up that and try and do their own version, which meant that Hoggle had like 15 different motors to move his face in different ways, which meant there's like 3 people all working Hoggle's just his face.
Yeah. It's no Howard the Duck, though.
It is no Howard the Duck, which, honestly, thank God.
Also Lucas.
Yeah, that's true. He has a thing for puppets, and I just don't know if he's really as out about it as he could be.
It's fine. But we rescue Ludo. He's gentle giant, nice little guy.
And while we love Ludo, he is the most side character ever created.
Out of
the whole group that we're about to collect.
Yeah.
He's mostly just there to be sweet and kind. And that's kind of boring.
He's there to provide a path when no one else has something.
Yeah.
Because quickly after we save it, we're on to some talking door knockers, which the what one definitely hears everything. I could not watch this without just hearing, what? Little John, what?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. I couldn't get past it. But they're also kind of charming in their own way. I mean, they pretend like they know the way, like which one's the right route to take. They have no fucking clue. They're door knockers.
They're door knockers. Yeah, they've never left.
It makes me think a little bit Beauty and the Beast, like.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. There's definitely some Alice in Wonderland and the doorknob happening here.
Mm-hmm.
I do like the collection of it. And then later on, we see this idea and these Muppets, or creatures, reimagined for the Muppets Christmas Carol with the door knocker to Scrooge's house.
Oh, do they?
It's a reimagining, but it was a similar technique used for that they had already perfected for this movie.
Okay. Interesting. From here, we get a recap to show Toby is still fine, and the king is taking a bit of a liking to him that, he's got my eyes, or some shit like that.
Yeah, he's, like, slowly decided, like, this is his own child.
Maybe I won't turn you into a goblin if Sarah fails.
Yeah, and I also think that this is part of where Bowie's backstory on, like, he doesn't really want to be the Goblin King. He doesn't want to be turning Toby into a goblin. He's just here to fuck around.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is one of the scenes where you can see it better.
Oh, yeah. And it's such a brief scene, too, because, like, it lasts, like, maybe 30 seconds before we're back into the woods, a very classic spooky woods. Which shows the extent of the labyrinth, where the labyrinth isn't just constructed buildings.
Oh, it just keeps going.
Yes. It's got its own, like, little natural woody part, which
I do like.
Ludo was obviously a scaredy cat, of course.
Oh, yeah.
We do get some cool shots of, like, the forced perspective multiple rocks that make up the Goblin King's face. Also, I don't understand how Hoggle's not been put into the
stench bog yet? Yeah, I don't either. It seems like he's fucked up a lot.
Yeah, there's some bad, like, fake crows in the background of part. They use real crows at parts, too.
They do, but okay, so part of the reason they have bad fake crows is Henson had already agreed, like we said, he had already said, like, he was committing to having all 3 of the taboo things in one movie. Muppets, or puppets, animals, and babies. He's like, I've already got a full movie of puppets, and one of the main actors is a baby. We might as well already have the animals in here. And he had just gotten off of, like, he had already agreed to have all these birds. It's mostly birds in this movie. And the chickens annoyed him so badly that he cut a lot of the scenes with the crows, because he's like, I can't stand birds anymore.
You already forgot Merlin. How dare you?
I know. Well, Merlin was one of the best behaved animals on set.
It's a dog.
Well, yes. The chickens really got to him. He complained a lot in the interviews about the chickens. But that's part of the reason why he felt very confident, because he had really great success working with the dog. He had really, he's the master of puppets. Yes, there were some things that went wrong, but, him and his amazing team has always made it work. Mm-hmm. And then they had the baby who wouldn't make any noises.
Right. Production never goes well. No. At least we didn't. Well, I wish we had a Del Toro style rant about horses.
That's true. The animals, his rant lasted only 5 minutes, and it was about the fact that one of the chickens wouldn't walk across the stage.
Yeah, and he hired trained chickens.
He did, but also these are chickens, my man.
But we get the poison peach, and I do have questions about Hoggle's coat, because this is the first time we really get to see it. It looks like it's someone's face.
I know.
Some hide on his back.
Yeah, I have no idea.
But it's just little things of setting up Hoggle's story, and
true.
It's time for the fire gang, which
this scene's cool, doesn't really make any sense.
It feels like they're Hakuna Matata. Here's what I think it is.
A little bit.
It's a fun little bit of slapstick humor, but
it is.
I mean, some of it makes me think a little bit of Guinea Pig 3. He Never Died, decapitation horror, and humor and whatnot. But I think this part's kind of important to show that even though it's playful, this is dangerous, because they start off fun, but then it quickly evolves that, hey, we're going to take your head off too now.
This true. And a lot of this was inspired from different puppeteers who were working and creating these puppets, having listened to the music, which had already been produced for this movie, them hearing the lyrics and the words, and thinking, well, what if we incorporated that more into the movie?
Yes. And it's some cool... I think a lot of this movie was just also to show off the techniques and their knowledge of what they were doing.
Very much.
Because part of the reason we see the dark outline around a lot of this is because it was done on a black velvet set, and they didn't have enough time to fully do it, and get that fine black line removed at post-production. And that's partly because Henson normally had worked on video, whereas when he was actually working on physical film, it was okay, this is a little bit harder. I mean, different quality. But this is done in the style of Japanese puppeteering called bunraku, where puppeteers are all in black and they're in view of the audience, but they're trying to blend in. They're kind of like the stagehands.
Yes.
So if you've ever seen the movie Double Suicide, or those videos where people are playing ping pong and there's people moving them, that's it.
And this sort of puppeteering moved on in the 90s to become very popular. It got really brought to light and emphasized more with Disney's production of The Lion King on Broadway.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I don't think I barely... Okay, now that you say it, I vaguely remember it.
So that one has a mix between incorporating the humans into the puppets and making them part or a side character along with it, on top of also having them try and become one with the background using similar techniques.
I am one with the background. The background is one with me.
Exactly. All stagehands know this well.
Yeah, my first run crew, I wore white socks.
Oh, Nicho.
I didn't have black socks.
Nicho, they might see your socks.
They did. They totally did. I think that was the night they recorded.
Oh, Nicho!
But we're reunited with Hoggle after escaping the fire gang.
Woo-hoo.
Only to fall in a trapdoor to the pit of eternal stench, which we do get a cool Bowie face in the background. I wish I had known about that face beforehand, because I wonder how many more times it shows up, because it feels like... Well, it also feels like it's not just he's seeing through the eyes of the creatures. It's he's
the maze.
He's watching everything.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. And honestly, what makes this pit of eternal stench much worse is it looks like it's just a bunch of assholes farting.
Oh, and the noise that they chose for it is just a bunch of people farting.
Yeah,
it's great.
Disgusting.
It is hilarious. This is the level of humor that I really appreciate.
It's fart humor, which I normally like fart humor, but...
Well, and this is the most childish version of fart humor, too. There was no need for the swamp to make, whoopee cushion style fart noises. No. But they went with it, and I appreciate that.
No, not at all. Everyone ends up being safe. I mean, it's a quick scene.
Of course.
This is the only time we see... Well, we're still in the bog for a little bit, because Ludo's back. The bridge over is guarded by a rat terrier. It's like the Black Knight from
yes, he is.
Holy Grail.
I love him very much.
But I also because it continues the idea of ask the right questions, because... all the other questions she's asked beforehand haven't been the right questions.
No, she hasn't really learned.
No, but it's just the simple of well, can we cross? Yes.
Yeah. I also love that this is where the greatest actor, the bearded collie, comes in. His name is Ambrosia, and I love him very much.
No, Ambrosia's his dog.
Yes.
Oh.
The best actor.
Oh, okay. I see what you mean.
He's very cute. He's meant to be cowardly, but this is by far the best trained animal on the entire set by like a long shot. And so, despite the fact that this is meant to be a very cowardly lion sort of dog and steed, it just ends up him being both a puppet and an actual dog combined to create the character Ambrosia. And he is delightful.
Ambrosia and Didymus.
And
God, the dog puppet is so
It's a dog
bad.
riding a dog, and I think it's hilarious. It's a small dog riding a bigger dog.
It's fine. But we also get the little part where Ludo's actually kind of helpful.
That's true. It's just one scene.
Honestly, it does make me question like some of the other lessons we're supposed to be learning, because like Didymus doesn't really teach us anything. Ludo teaches us to help those in need.
She doesn't actually learn that, though.
No, because it's the one time it happens.
Yeah, and whatever, the dog on top of a dog was supposed to teach her.
Courage.
Yeah, she doesn't learn that either.
Yeah.
If anything, the only thing she learns in this entire movie is to stop saying that's not fair.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I mean, the rocks help them through. Music is really cheesy at this point.
It is. Part of this music was the music that Bowie helped create, and part of the reason it sounds cheesy is because it wasn't originally meant to be set up like this. He had created pretty much an album and then brought it to them because he hadn't worked on a musical before. At least not like this.
Well, he wasn't the composer for this portion.
He wasn't, but he had brought this forward.
Yeah, I can see it. It makes me think of a little bit of, like, the Unsolved Mysteries.
Yeah.
Like, only you can call and solve this mystery.
Oh, for sure. And honestly, even though it's, like, none of the music truly fits this movie, it's a Muppet sort of thing. Everything doesn't really fit. Mm-hmm. So I think it's fine. I don't really care. I like mostly listening to the music on its own. And as a soundtrack, it works.
It's fine.
Yeah. In the movie, meh.
Yeah. I'm gonna have a listen to it.
It's very 80s rock vibes.
There were parts that did make me think of, and I'm going to bring it up because it's one of my favorite game series, the Etrian Odyssey, where you're exploring a labyrinth.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, but we continue this labyrinth by biting into the poison peach that finally comes into play, which it was supposed to be a symbol of entering a new phase of her life as she's been trapped in childhood. It kind of makes me think of like forbidden fruit, and now like with today's like emojis and stuff, like a peach is a little bit too sexual, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I see what you mean. I think mostly it, like, I understand when they're talking in the commentary about how like this is her transition into being more of an adult. I don't think it quite plays out, partially because her attitude later throughout the film doesn't change enough for me.
Well,
I think mostly this is just part of the play that she had written, like she's reenacting. That character is clearly meant to be much older than she is, and like that would make sense for that character to be in a more adult situation. She doesn't understand that, though. Yeah,
well, and it also doesn't really make sense, too, especially like from hearing a lot of the transitions is she kind of gets stoned, it appears, and then just has either visions or is transported by bubbles to the ball that we finally get to see.
Yeah, I think part of this was, again, supposed to be showing off that, like, she is placed herself in a very adult situation and is now realizing that, like, she doesn't belong. She is still a kid to some extent.
Yeah, that's what the ball's supposed to be. I mean, it's very Carnivale, but grotesque and dangerous.
And it has the most real people we see on set for the entire movie.
Yeah, it feels a little bit eyes wide shut because, like you said, she's not supposed to be there.
Yeah, but again, there is the entire theory that this whole movie is in her head, so, like, this is mostly just her realizing that, like, oh, yeah, you know, I can daydream about this handsome man all I want, but, like, I don't actually know what I'm doing here.
Maybe I shouldn't have eaten Mom and Dad's special cookies.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, and I mean, it's a good scene to show, like, that she is out of her depth again.
For sure. And honestly, the vibes of this scene, the, like, visuals of the scene are something that a lot of people latched onto and really love. Like, like, I know people in high school who, like, their whole bedrooms were this vibe. They wanted their room to look like this specific scene.
It's so white.
It's very white, but it's frilly, it's soft, it's got like a light glitter feel to it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of layers, there's a lot of Victorian influences. There was, like, this was a popular look for a while.
The Mask of Red Death.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same vibe as people who were really into Phantom of the Opera.
Yeah.
Like, it's the same, just a slightly different color palette.
Yeah. But the only reason she even breaks out of this dream is, like, she's got, well, this is also, I do want to point out, this is a very music video scene, too.
Yes, this is another one of the ones where they were leaning into the David Bowie aspect.
Yeah. But the only reason she gets out of it is because she realizes she has an hour left and somehow falls into a garbage heap, which, I don't know if the bubbles teleported her or what. They
don't ever explain this either.
No.
I tried to find anything, and nobody says anything, as far as I could find.
She probably just wandered into it, really, in her daze.
Honestly, it's Sarah. Look at her.
Yeah. Well, we also get, like, this whole garbage scene is just supposed to be the old woman is her future if she becomes too attached to her possessions or becomes fully absorbed in the fantasy world.
Another lesson that Sarah does not learn in this movie.
Yeah, we get this, like, she's back in her room. She's like, oh, I'm back. I'm safe. Which, this is the only time we get to maybe see a photo of her mother. There's a photo on the nightstand.
Yeah, it's maybe her mom.
Yeah, I'm assuming so.
Me too, but, like, we really don't know.
Yeah, but I do like the scene of where the old woman just starts piling the stuff on her back of, like, yeah, you'll like it. You'll enjoy it. Don't you want to miss this? Oh, you're going to miss Lancelot.
Yeah, it is a good, like, lesson scene. And I think for the audience, it is something that, like, a lot of people did take away. Mm-hmm. I just don't think the character herself learned anything.
No, not at all. And, I mean, it's quickly over, too, because she's saved by Ludo and, Ludo's called. Mm-hmm. And they finally get to the Goblin City where Horgel fails, but it ain't his fault. I mean...
Yeah, I do like the redemption arc that Hoggle gets. His character is good. He doesn't change so much that he's, like, a different character, but you do, like, learn to trust and like him, and you do feel bad when he finally, like, is taken down.
Well, and he's not even, like, fully taken down, because immediately after we get into the city, we're fighting the giant mech. Which they did say was the hardest puppet to figure out since it was 15 feet tall.
They originally had done it in a, like, foam-like substance, and unfortunately it moved so much it kept cracking, so they had to redo it, like, completely remake the whole thing, to then make it out of a much harder plastic so that it wouldn't break, but it meant that it was much harder to puppeteer.
Yeah.
And so they're like, well, this is it, this is what we got.
And I think it works well. I mean,
I think it looks great.
It serves its purpose of forcing Horgel to actually, or not Horgel, Hoggle, to step up and, like, actually show that he's on their side.
True.
And kind of redeem himself for drugging a child.
Yeah, and we also get some fun background scenes with Sir Demetrius and his delightful steed Ambrosia. Like, there's some funny battle scenes, and honestly, the entire reason there's a battle happening at all is because Lucas and Henson both agreed that, like, the climax of any good classical literature was war, and how do you put that in essentially a Muppet movie? This was their solution.
Yeah, cheesy. I mean...
it is cheesy, but it is war.
Yeah, I mean, the Goblin City does feel good. It feels like a Dark Souls town. The fountains are all pissing.
It is funny.
All pissing figures.
It's hilarious.
But, yeah, I mean, it is a fun... It is a good way to do it without, like, doing... gore, because it's fun. They've got guns and stuff. Like, it goes straight up crazy fantasy instead of just being medieval. It's got a bunch of other weird stuff that's being thrown in.
And a lot of the, like, diversion from the, like, honestly darker version of this was thanks to a lot of the side puppeteers. A lot of them brought forward ideas of how the goblins would war, because Henson was like, well, you guys are, like, you're in charge of all these characters. You tell me how they would fight. And they did, and he was like, yeah, you're right, this is much better than, like, chopping off a head.
Yeah, well, and it also just shows the collaborative process that this whole movie was.
It really was, and it makes it so much better, because you can even hear some of the puppeteers made up lines as they went. Like, there's one that is used as a cannonball, and he hits a wall, and you can hear him briefly say, "Did I hit anything?"
Yeah, and I mean, the humor's a little there, too. Like,
it is. It does help lighten the war.
Oh, yeah. I mean, especially when we're going to get to a very serious moment, because finally we get to the throne room with minimal attempts to be honest.
That's true. She does just kind of waltz in there.
Yeah, and she's decided it's her battle. She's got to fight it alone, which now is the part that I think most people remember from this movie, the MC Escher world.
Yes, and this is an amazing piece.
Yeah, best part of the movie, which super cool from a set design standpoint because it was lit from many directions so that you couldn't figure out where like the actual orientation of everything was.
Apparently working on it was so trippy that several of the actors had to remind themselves regularly that which way was up by looking at their own feet.
Yep. Well, and also, Henson at one point wanted to put baby Toby up on like this 30-foot pillar, and
he did get vetoed.
Yeah, by the parents pretty hard, which I get it.
Yeah.
But honestly, this is the coolest part of the movie.
It's such a cool scene.
I mean, the musical part's fine, whatever. But
it fits the rest of the movie, at least.
Yeah, it feels very JRPG, where the final boss battle at the end.
And it's like the trippy boss battle where he has endless health and potions.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And I really like it. It does fit with like the entire idea of like this all-powerful wizard goblin king, right? Like, we tried to give him magical powers. We're really leaning into it here.
Yeah. And when like it finally starts falling apart, and this is where she's truly, quote unquote, an adult, and you have no power here.
Yeah.
Like, actually has no power here.
Yes.
It was designed to show that Bowie was going to be more, Jareth was going to be more ethereal. So that way it was to show that his concrete power that he previously had was now dissolving, and Sarah was taking back control of her reality.
And I really love this, like, narrative. I think a lot of these themes and a lot of these messages are really great. I think my only complaint is that the only lesson Sarah truly learns is to stop bitching.
Yeah. Yeah, well, because, like, she doesn't really... Because what the movie ends with her, like, free checking on Toby, and then saying goodbye to all her childish things. And it basically, what it sums up to is the end of the start of Toy Story 3, where she regresses back to childhood, where it's like, I think Horgel says it or something, where it's like, we'll be here whenever you need us.
And she's like, I will always need you, Hoggle.
But let's party first.
Yeah. It's a very good lesson. It's very cute, but I don't think the actions of Sarah align with the, like, end of the movie. I do think that, like, it all works. Like, it's all very fine, and I do think all of the things that is shown to the audience has learned. But I am not convinced that Sarah has truly learned not to sell her, brother-in-law, or not brother-in-law, her stepbrother to goblins.
No, not at all. Or not even half-brother.
Yeah, her half-brother to goblins.
No.
I don't think she's actually learned that lesson. I think what she has learned is that she can also say to other people, life is not fair.
Yeah, and stop whining a little bit.
A little bit. She still whines a lot, though.
Yeah. But Labyrinth, unfortunately, did flop commercially.
Yeah.
It built a cult following and got new life through home video. Unfortunately, it was after Henson had died, so... He,
unfortunately, died thinking that this movie had been a terrible flop, which a lot of... Especially his son, who has been a spokesperson ever since his death, has... told multiple outlets that he's very convinced that this was part of the spiraling of his dad, that, like, he had a lot of faith and was very proud of Labyrinth and was very disappointed in its success rate. It did do better in Europe. Like, England and the UK in general had much better sales than they did in the US, but Henson's main audience had always been in the US, and so not succeeding there really did mess him up.
And Brian Henson also put out that he thinks people just didn't know how to respond, because you had people who were fans of Henson, fans of Bowie, and just they didn't fully mesh.
No, and I think there's a very good reason for that, and it's an unfortunate reality for a lot of Henson's works. It is much more impressive to know how the magic act is done than to just watch it without knowing how the magic is created. And then normally, that's not the way movies work. Normally, seeing, like, this impossible thing, like people flying or impossible animals or situations, that's the fun of a movie. However, that's not the case with Henson Predictions.
You think more like Never-Ending Story, kind of.
Yeah, and so, unfortunately, his works never came out during his lifetime with the behind the scenes bit. The closest we got was there was a I believe it was straight to broadcasting, like PBS, the documentary Behind the Labyrinth, and they did interview just about everybody they could get a hands on. It is a very good documentary, and I do think it helped. A lot of people then bought the VHS or the DVD copy after that came out, but the DVD copy didn't come with it. At least not originally. It does now. But, like, originally it didn't come with that any extra information. You had to have seen this documentary on TV, known about all this, gotten to see these behind-the-scenes acts, and then gone and bought the DVD or the VHS tape.
Yeah, and I mean, I can see a little bit of this, too, of, like, why it wouldn't do well, especially, like, it was up against, like, Top Gun, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Karate Kid 2.
And I mean, all of those have also solidified themselves in American culture.
Karate Kid 2, not as much, I'd say, but...
Not as much, but Ferris Bueller definitely did.
But I definitely agree it was a confusing movie the first time I saw it, too. And I still am a little confused at, like, what... I know the intent was to create a timeless film, and to that point, I do say I see it with the practical effects.
Sure.
I mean, every time you have practical effects, they definitely age, but they don't age as quickly or as poorly as a lot of CGI.
Sure, it's always still impressive to see that many people working together on something.
Yeah. But Henson also wanted to push puppets past it's just for kids, which I 100% appreciate, and I see where he was trying to go with Labyrinth. I wish if he had actually gone fully darker with it, I think people could have potentially seen it, or maybe made the puppets more Star Wars-y and less Muppets.
True.
But I mean, it's the same thing we see with anime as us growing up. Of like,
for sure.
Oh, they're cartoons. They're just for kids. Where it's like, no, I've slowly been introducing my mother to anime, and the stuff she's seen she likes.
That's true. And while the Henson Company in general has, and like honestly, Labyrinth and Dark Crystal were pioneers of creating puppet films for adults that were, you know, either family friendly or just an overall timeless classic sort of styled movie. It took a very long time for that media to break away enough from a children's viewing, and I would argue that it still hasn't quite hit that mark. No. We do get to see now more well done puppeteering. The Henson Company and the Creature Creations have gone on to put their works into other productions, not just create their own, and that has helped a lot too. However, most of the work that Labyrinth did, instead of moving on and helping more puppet-based movies, went on to help practical effect movies.
Yeah, I mean,
which is also good. We've talked about this a lot. It is honestly the preferred way if you have the time and the ability to do it half the time.
Yeah, I mean, hell, Toby Froud, the tiny human in the movie, went on to do sculpture and puppets as well, and he's worked on The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. He's also worked with Laika Studios, Paranorman, Kubo, The Two Strings. He worked on Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, which I still need to see, and he was design supervisor on the Dark Crystal Age of Resistance,
which was a fantastic reimagining.
Still need to see, but
you'll like that one, I think.
I'm sure I will, because I do like Dark Crystal. So, but also I think this movie also depends on when you saw it, of like your love for it, because I completely can see how if I had seen this a little bit younger, or if I was a young girl seeing this movie.
Yes.
From what I know of a lot of kids' movies, and I don't know a whole lot, it feels like it's one of the few at the time that was geared heavily towards a young girl, because it was partially inspired by Henson's own daughter.
Yes.
But you have a strong not just it's a girl role, it's a strong female role.
True.
And it's her growing. It's just, I think there's a lot of good themes that this movie has going for it that just, unfortunately, is a little bit missed in a lot of the goofiness that happens around it.
I agree, and I do think that a lot of the more impressive themes that the audience eventually does take away are themes that fans have been able to understand more by rewatching it several times, understanding the production, the cast and crew, where their ideas and thoughts were coming from, because now we have an absorbent amount of information from people who have worked on this. They never stopped talking about it. They still don't stop talking about it. And I do think that helped a lot, especially if you weren't immediately drawn in like I was. Like, I was about the right age when I saw this. I was a senior in high school, So I was a little older than Sarah, but I still could understand the appeal. I had very much been, like, in the Phantom of the Opera fandom. Like, that had been very popular when I was in high school. So I got the appeal of this movie right away from a girl's standpoint. Then when I revisited it again later in college, I could finally understand, like, why other people would be interested other than just, like, a 16-year-old girl. Because there is really good themes. There is really good messages and morals that happen throughout the story, but you do need a little bit of background to really grasp them.
Yeah, I think that's just the fault of, one, it being a little goofy.
Yeah, it is a little goofy. I also think it's a little long.
Yeah, just a little bit. And it doesn't go, because Kevin Smith did something similar. He wanted to create a movie that was, like, based off a garbage movie he saw as a kid, like, just stumbled upon, but he wanted to create it for his daughter. It's called Yoga Hoosers. It's got his daughter and Johnny Depp's daughter in it, too.
Yeah.
It's a fun and dumb movie, but it's another one where it's just, like, it's a little bit over the top goofy with, like, the Bratzies and stuff.
Sure, and a lot of the, like, fun goofiness that comes with having Muppets and creatures in your film you cannot get away from the fact that does change how your film is seen. We saw it with the Dark Crystal, and even the remake of the Dark Crystal, which got better success because it had already, like, been based off of the original. But even when the first one came out, it was very hard for a lot of people to get over the puppet fact. Because the Henson puppets, even when they are trying to be very serious, like they were with the Dark Crystal, they have a special look. They have a certain version of themselves.
Yeah.
That, for a lot of people, it's mostly just eye candy. It's not bad. Like, this is a very fun eye candy movie if that's all you're watching it for. But I do think it takes multiple watches for most people to really get the full story.
I completely agree with that. And I will say, it's not totally missed on me. It did inspire me. It inspired me to go back and play the Etrian Odyssey games.
Which is fine.
Yeah. I mean, it's Labyrinth, and I like that kind of shit, too, but...
I mean, it's meant to be an epic tale, and honestly, yeah, like, it reminded me a lot of a bunch of the other classic tales that I do enjoy, and I probably will go and revisit again, because they have ties, they're similar themes. I'm gonna enjoy that.
Yeah. It's one of those movies where I do wish Henson had lived long enough to see
the influence of it. I do too. Because, unfortunately, he didn't get to see the full works of the Henson Company in general. There's a lot of films that, like, if he had made it or we could show him, would be much easier to point to and say, look how successful your puppets, your characters even, have become. But this was the first one that he felt that he was truly, like, doing something different, really changing something up here, that it would have been really great to show him and say, like, there's hardly anybody left who hasn't seen this movie.
Yeah, and I mean, his death was just sudden. It was just organ failure and, like, from some shock syndrome? I don't know. Yeah. I'm not medically inclined to tell you anything about it, but...
There's plenty of documentaries if you're more interested in his personal life. His son has done a great job of being an advocate for him and his career and continuing on his works. There was some fantastics, like, immediately after his death. I think PBS had some very good interviews with both Kermit the Frog and Big Bird, two characters who had been very near and dear to his heart, which did a wonderful job of discussing his impact in the world and how he really did change TV and movies in general. His stand-up show with the Muppets changed how we saw live performances. Sesame Street completely changed how we see children's programming in general, and still to this day continues to change it. It's one of the most heavily researched and produced productions for children ever created across the entire world. There's one for almost everywhere at this point. And it is very sad that he didn't get to see that. And I honestly think that a lot of it, Labyrinth helped a lot, because it bridged that gap between Sesame Street and the Muppets.
Yeah. Why edutainment now?
Yeah. It did create the entire edutainment, though. It was, like, I mean, nowadays it's very, like, skit-based, and it's very, like...
we fall into it a bit.
We do. But, like, he really did create this entire genre of work, and then branched it off and really created an empire that changed how we look at movies and TV. It created another medium that was then taken seriously, And I do think that Labyrinth had a huge role in that, even though it's not one of his, like, best-known works, even though it's...
I'd say it's up there on some of his best-known works.
I think it is once people realize the connection between Jim Henson, Sesame Street, and the Muppets. But I do think, and it's a more common acknowledgement now than it was during his life, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But the connection is still one that I don't think is as readily available as it should be. It especially wasn't when he was alive. The disconnect between who he was with the Sesame Street versus the Muppets, who the Muppets were versus his character creations and his separate movies that had no Muppets in it whatsoever, was not as strong as I think he had hoped that Labyrinth was going to create.
Yeah.
He had started that with The Dark Crystal. He had gotten some good success there, but it had surpassed this point that he wanted. He had been looking for that middle ground to tie in the younger audience, because while the Muppet Show, especially nowadays, is for everybody, it was really aimed more at adults, especially with when it was programmed and when it was on. Labyrinth was meant to be that middle ground, and I think that truly has helped bridge that gap, because we still grew up with Sesame Street, right? And then eventually a lot of us do continue on, and we have other puppet experiences. Labyrinth is a great bridge point, and I do think that it's one of the few things that he created that's truly in that ballpark.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, it definitely, I can see where it holds a special spot for some people.
Definitely.
So, Chris, good, bad, weird, what do you rate this movie?
This one for me is a good and weird. There's some scenes that even as a Muppet and creature lover myself that I'm not really sure if they were especially needed, but I enjoy them. They're a little goofy. Example, the fire creatures. I enjoyed it. They have no purpose in the movie.
No, not other than, the danger and what I talked about, but...
And also, the music is a little out there. It didn't need to be that much.
It's very Rastafarian, man.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. I enjoy all of it, but I totally understand that there's a lot of weird happening, and it's not just because they're Muppets.
Yeah, I'm in the same camp. It's a good weird for me. Just... I think I have to set aside my own personal bias towards it.
Sure.
Because I know it's not a movie for me, and I'm not going to go back to it. But I do appreciate it for what it is, what Jim Henson's intentions were, and I do like the weirdish bits of it too. So, yeah, that's I guess how I feel about it. So, Chris, would you recommend this movie, though?
Yes, I would. I think everyone should see it at least once. I think even if you don't initially think that it's for you, it's good to have it under your belt if you're a movie watcher or a movie buff. It does have a special spot in history, especially in the cult classics world. And if you haven't, and if you're not a movie buff, I still think you should see it, just because it might be the gateway to a bunch of other movies for you.
Yeah, I can see that. I'm not going to recommend this movie.
Sure.
I'm maybe to a select group, or like you said, just one, at least watch it one time.
Sure.
And move on from there, but I'm not particularly going to recommend it, because it's not, I don't know, it's just not for me, and so it's hard to recommend a movie that I know is not for me,
Understandable.
So, but now it is time for the 3 Degrees of Takashi Miike. For those who don't know, Year 5 of the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast, we decided to start a game. The standard rules: 3 degrees to get to Takashi Miike, has to be a movie connection, and I cannot use the same connection, movie, actor, writer, director, twice. And I also have to try and make the plots or themes tie in as best I can.
Technically, you've already won, but we now play for funsies.
Yes. So, I went with the Goblin King himself, David Bowie.
Yeah, I figured.
Who was in Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, which I just watched last year, with Daisuke Iijima, who was in Neighbor Number 13, which Miike acted in.
Wow.
It is about a dream world and self-discovery, about a guy who's reflecting on the future of what he could have been after bullying.
I think this is one of the better ones you've done. Congratulations.
Yes, thank you. It's also one of my... I do highly recommend watching Neighbor Number 13, because it's got some weird shit in it, too. Like, this dudes dancing naked around each other.
Fun.
Yeah.
5 feet apart.
Save some space for Miike.
Yeah.
But, anywho, this has been the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast.
Thanks for listening.
Peace. Thank you for stopping by this here town of the good, the bad, and the weird. We appreciate your listenership, and if you want more of our takes in your life, feel free to check us out on social media at The Good, the Bad, and the Weird Podcast, or TGTBTW for short. As well, if we missed a fact, your favorite part of a movie, or just have a suggestion and want to reach out and say howdy, feel free to email us at tgtbtwpodcast@gmail.com. And feel free to join our Discord at The Good, the Bad, and the Weird Podcast, where we talk about movies, just share random banter here and there. And always, check out our podcasters, streamers, or any other content creator we shout out in our episodes. We really appreciate it. And as always, thank you for listening. Peace.